We good? Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so welcome back, everybody. We're going to start with a comment from Marco Lam. Marco.
My question is, as we gain a more complex worldview and can see more of like the system dynamics that are causing like larger challenges, it seems like more and more of the problems are global in scope. Like when we talk about the U.S. deficit, it's if we take it out of context of like trade balance and sort of global debt on a level of just basically all the European countries producing more debt. It's sort of like a debt race to a certain extent. The same thing with environmental and carbon emission problems. It seems like more and more of the problems are like global in orientation. And so from both your perspectives, like how do we deal with those sort of larger scale globalist issues that are really post-governmental?
Do you want to start with that? I'll start. I think it's just the continuation of of evolution in a sense. We are just able to see more. And so, you know, when we started out as tribes, we maybe knew 20 people for most of human history. And then we knew 100 people. And then we knew 250 people or 100 people. Like my grandfather knew 100 people right in here. And then, you know, good Lord. And we just could go from tribe to nation to, and now there's there's basically a de facto international government, you know, of NGOs and treaties and NATOs and World Trade Organizations, and some of it that we can certainly see the downside of all of it. This is, you know, but the trend and the irreversible trend is to more integration. And so that we see all of humanity as us. I mean, and that's part of the postmodern insight. And we carry that into integral. And that all the while, and this is where I think you and I have most of our conflict, is that the public sector is happening. And that it's legitimate. And the public sector is sometimes government, and sometimes it isn't. And when you talk about the 1900s, it's, you know, there was a small government. There's no doubt about it. There was a military, there was a post office, there was, I don't know what there was, but not much. But there was also a structure of society that was just amber. I mean, it's just families and communities, and they do, in a certain way, take care of themselves. They do. There is I think, egregious enough exception to that, where you have the outliers that actually live abject lives that just get lost in the system. I think that does happen. Certainly. And that the move forward is just that we take care of that in a collective way. And we do that through taxation and redistribution. And
that's one of the ways.
Pardon me?
That's one of the ways that we do that.
Yes. And that is a legitimate way that we do that.
Absolutely.
And continues to be. And is probably, in my view, more and more going to come online, because we actually have the wealth to create decent lives in terms of not just the basic that you're not going to be swept into the street, but that you can actually get educated, and you can actually have a life that is not as productive as the sort of growth model. It's basically the difference between a growth model and a sustainability model. And there's lots of ideas of how that will be, and we can entertain them. And you probably, I think actually I think it's essentially what you're talking about is part of that, is that we have this sort of radical freedom that is just sort of, you know, I mean, just in a first principle is ultimately, no, you can't, motherfucker. I mean, there's something about, you know.
Certainly that as well.
I think that's important somehow, and I think that'll be online in a way that it isn't now. That we do really have to give some of our sovereignty up. Mm-hmm. And I think we're actually working our way to that. And, you know, that's all. Mm-hmm. That's all I'd add. Mm-hmm. And maybe, you know. Yeah, so, Brett, you could have had a thought.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was just curious, Mark. So I think as we grow more sophisticated developmentally, our circle of care increases, and the bottom gets raised, you know? So it's no longer about, like, you can't beat your wife. It's actually like, you can't poison the water, and you have to sell us, you know, decent meat that isn't poisoned, and, you know, so the standard keeps getting raised. And I think government's a good engine for that, and I think the free market's a good engine for that too. But I'm curious, like, as a libertarian, where your responsibility to not hurt people ends and where your responsibility to help other people begins. Does that even exist?
The trick is when you define responsibility. Right? Each of us walks down the street and people need things that we don't provide. How do we each individually make that choice? I mean, the truth is, of all the things that people need that I could provide, I don't do 99.9% of them. Right? I'm always making a choice between what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. And so if you say that you've got a responsibility to take care of people, I think that speaks to a truth, which is that we care about one another. And within our scope of ability and within our scope of resources and within our understanding about what's valuable, we each give in the way that we feel is appropriate. And in that sense, we're responsible. We're able to respond according to our values in caring to other people. And you bring in the spiral as you increase your understanding of self, or as you refine your understanding of self. You expand your circle of care. And so the things that you're inspired to do expand. When you say that someone has to do something for someone else, and you bring in this piece of force, and you say you're responsible in terms of you need to do this, and you cannot do this. When you bring in that level of direction, and you bring force into it, to say that we're responsible, where do we draw that line?
Well, let me ask you where. Is it okay
Where would
to
you draw
walk,
the line?
Is it okay to walk past a dying child and not help?
Okay, the challenge is that we all walk past dying children every day.
Yeah.
Right? So is it okay to do that? It hurts our hearts. It hurts our hearts, but we do it.
Well,
We
I would
walk by
argue we do
homeless
it less
people.
and less as we actually get more and more, and this is still ways to go. But just as we would never let a child suffer in our backyard, we would move heaven and earth or our community. We just get, as we evolve, we get a bigger view of who our children are. And we have a national view of that, but we also have increasingly, and very significantly increasingly, an international view of that. That is, in many ways, through NGOs and through governments' enforcement in different parts of the world. But, you know, child labor we can see the vanishing point of that globally, and that's this system working. I guess maybe pointing out
agree with
the
everything
part of it that's working. I don't know.
I
Maybe
agree.
you're pointing out the part that isn't.
I think that's part of it.
Maybe it's part of it.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
I think everything you said is true. It seems like a broken record, but it's just the one question that I want to ask is, what causes that? What drives that? Is it the legislation?
Yes.
Or
it's all things. It's a bunch of things. It's the system moving forward. You know, and to be friendly to it is, I think, an achievement in and of itself, because there's a certain, complaint about it that's, I don't know, to me starting to feel old, just in general, just to sort of complain about life in general. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Not exactly.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a certain, I think there's what I would call people to, and what I call myself to, is a friendliness to what is, and to see that actually the forces at work, there's a condemnation in most views that I think just gets, I think it gets us somewhere. But at some point, we just want to say we're riding an updraft, and that we can see evolution, and that all of these systems, and including our political system, we're just, this far above beating each other with clubs. We have civilized ourselves, and it wasn't because there was a radical freedom. We civilized ourselves because there was a growth of the collective that was not voluntary. An involuntary collective, I guess, would be my view, that is legitimate and continues to evolve itself. And I think largely through persuasion, because there's very little force in it anymore, really. Except that they will come and haul you away if you don't pay your taxes.
Yeah, except for the laws.
Yeah.
I agree, there isn't a lot of force.
Yeah.
But so I'll agree with you that the collective has a legitimate role,
Yeah.
and that it is evolving, and that we're in an extraordinary place. And where we go from
really
here,
smart people in government.
and where we're going from here is
And they're heroic.
important. And we can say that wherever it's growing, we're just going to ride that wave. Like, it's just growing, and we're just going to ride the wave.
Well, I think as an integralist, that is a legitimate perspective, and the one that's relatively new. That actually is friendly to the emergence itself, and all the while seeing that there's this and that becomes intelligent, but there's actually a contention between the collective and the individual, between agency and communion, that is fruitful. And you're, God knows, carrying your piece of it, and so am I, and we all are. But this is, the contention itself actually moves the intelligent forward in both realms.
Great. So let's say that that's legitimate.
Okay.
And let's say that as we take an integral perspective and we recognize that we have to start from where we are, there are some people who have more red motivation. There's some people that have these different motivations. And it's played out in the institutions we have today. And it's going to continue to develop. And from one perspective, we're riding that wave. And when you look at it from that perspective, it gives you enough distance that you can be with it. You can actually see the different parts. As I understand integral, it's about making distinctions that are helpful in understanding so that we can make better choices. It's not just green, postmodern. Yes, the society is how it is, and it's going to develop, right? And everybody's right, and everyone should have a fair shake. That's true. It's just not complete, as I understand the integral system.
Right.
The next,
That's right.
the next
You're right.
question is, within that, some of those choices that we make lead towards more development. They lead towards more thriving. They lead towards more flourishing. And how do you differentiate between, like you say, there's a lot of conflict going back and forth. If some of those things lead to more thriving and some of them lead to more suffering, how do you choose between those? How do you personally, how do you decide when it's okay to use force and when it's not okay to use force?
Well, we are all in compact now where we actually don't do a lot of, hauling people away. But there always is that threat, but we're all sort of in that game together. And I think that's just legitimate. Mm-hmm. And that's something, that's the part that we take notice of. And that, yes, there's a force. You could say that the whole thing is undergirded by force. That's true. But it's also undergirded by cooperation and mutual agreement and the appreciation of the benefit. Because now I can move away from my mother in Pennsylvania and come to Colorado and not know what's going to happen, but know that there's a bottom beneath which she won't fall, that she didn't know about her parents and was never able to leave, and that that's a good thing, as imperfect as it is. And that, yes, we muddle through, and you can see the sort of corruption of it, and you can see the sort of imperfections of it, but, you know, imperfection and reality itself is always falls short of one's idea of what reality ought to be.
Right, and from that perspective, when you say, okay, reality is what it is, and instead of judging it, I'm going to say yes to it.
Yes.
I'm going to embrace it.
Yes.
And you vote for a candidate, and you choose one candidate over another candidate.
Yes.
And you don't just say, well, each candidate is part of this movement, and so it doesn't matter who I vote for.
No, you
because
make a choice.
Yes, and so I'm asking you, what are the principles, as the government proposes, we're going to create a new law to force people to do things a certain way that they're not doing right now, right? We're going to say, okay, health care, you have to cover these people. You companies have to pay this. You individuals need to pay this, and it's not a tax.
It's never pretty, Mark. It's
right,
just never
it
pretty.
is never
so
pretty.
You can say, look, this is how it's not pretty. Okay, I get that. But, you know, what I see is just a bigger movement towards there's just a bottom beneath which nobody falls. And that's something. That's an achievement. And that bottom continues to rise, and it is continuing to rise with Obamacare, which is why I voted Obama. So you talk about the choices. I chose the guy who's going to just steer the ship. We're both in the 40-yard lines, you know. It's going to steer things a little bit more towards, we're going to take from the rich and give to the poor, motherfucker. And that's right. And I say that as a rich guy. And I, you know, I think it's just, you know, there's a certain imbalance that as a collective we can see and actually steer the ship. You know, I mean, we can, there's any number of ideologies that create, and Ayn Rand and in all of them, that and Marx, that create an ideal of what ought to be, and there's a lot of truth in those things. Those are certain North Stars in a way. I mean, they represent achievements of thinking. And so they come and inform, and this is where, you know.
Okay, I think this is, you could say, a place where I think we do disagree.
Okay, cool.
I do find value in saying, look, we're on a journey. And if we look at the trajectory is pretty good. And part of that trajectory is government and the use of force. And this theory has value, and that theory has value, and this theory has value.
Well understood. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that was well put.
Cool. And so all of these have value. Then there's a point where we need to choose one thing over another. We need to move out of green and move into integral, where we say, yes, we recognize that each of these values has value, but that doesn't mean that they're equally valuable, and it doesn't mean that they're equally appropriate to our situation.
Okay.
Right? And I think that that's where the real choices are. I agree that the more you can understand it as an unfolding evolution, that we breathe in with one taste and find absolute wonder in how beautiful it is. I think that's gorgeous. And then you have to choose who you're going to vote for. And there are principles by which you choose. I agree. I think that we should have a society that has a very high bottom, where everybody has all the resources they need in order to live a great life. I think that's a great thing. Right? So you and I are in agreement on that. The question is, what steps do we take lead there, and which ones lead away from it? That is the question. And in that, I believe you need to get into what are the underlying principles. And the fundamental question when it comes to government is force. Because there's the one thing that government it's the monopoly on the use of force. In Western society, we've structured our society so that
We
the
know
only people who can legitimately use force is government.
Yes.
And
That's
so
always been true as however you define government.
No, so I'll challenge that. In a lot of countries, if the government doesn't take care of it, the local tribe takes care of it.
Yeah.
The local leader takes care of it, and that's
It's
legitimate.
a lower level
They-
of government. It's tribal government.
Correct, and
Yeah.
I'm saying so. In our level of government, we have
But it's
delegated.
it's coercive in its own way.
It's
And
co-
a
yes,
lot
absolutely.
blunter,
I'm
a lot
not
more brutal.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And clannish and all of those things that we have all
Absolutely.
dealt with.
I much prefer being in the system that we're in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's the modern system. It's the postmodern system. It's, a mess. But
And,
it's an
and, so-
evolving
and
mess.
some things are better than others.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the question. Rather than, yes, it's a,
So
Yeah.
just to bring it right down to this week and this issue.
Mm-hmm.
So, do we raise taxes or do we raise the Medicare age, or what do we actually do in terms of a deal that is recognizable by any of the options that are on the table?
again, there's a lot of factors.
Well,
There's
I
a
know-
lot of factors.
I know there are, but
it's a complex system that, to speak back to what Marco was saying, right? When you've got such global issues with so many interdependencies,
I
you
vote higher
ha-
taxes and keep the benefits.
you have to understand that our understanding of the real world issues we're dealing with is inadequate. We really don't know how to steer an economy.
It's always inadequate.
It is always inadequate.
It's
So-
less inadequate every day.
In some ways, yes. But we can make a bad choice and follow it out for 100 years and do the same bad choice for 100 years. In the beginning of the 20th century, in the Western world, we moved towards centralized power. In the United States, we did the New Deal. In
Our view
Germany, we went to Nazism.
It was more us.
In Italy, we went to fascism. In China, we went to communism. In Russia, we went to Russian socialism. There was a movement towards greater government power, where we said, you know what? There is enough wealth to go around. We just need smart people to redistribute it. And they're going to redistribute it at the point of a gun. And once you make that choice, it changes the nature of our relationships with one another. And I'm not disagreeing with you that that's legitimate.
We never made that choice. That was just the reality of things. It's always been the reality of things.
Okay.
Whether it's a gun or a club or a spear.
From one
Or the,
perspective, we didn't make that choice. It was just evolution happening.
Yeah.
From another perspective, we voted for Rockefeller versus somebody else. We voted
Yeah.
for
So who'd you vote for this last time?
FDR. I actually voted for Gary Johnson,
Cool,
the
man.
libertarian candidate.
If I had any guts, I would have. I voted for Obama.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
your vote probably made a difference
Gary Johnson.
in Colorado.
I love Gary Johnson.
So it's when we vote, we choose. And we're choosing to take a certain idea and make it into a law that's going to be enacted by force. And once it's in place, it is unlikely to ever disappear. And so when we make that choice, I think we need to weigh it. We can't just say, from my perspective, we can't just say, oh, well, it's, life happens and in the overall arc we're moving forward. That there's a point where we say, okay, in this case, do we want to give the government the right to control this part of our lives? Or do we not want to? Do we think that's in our best interest? Right? If we get more people into the medical system, if we cover more people, in the short term, that will have an obvious benefit which no one can argue against. People without insurance, get insurance.
It's just like
life is good.
Well, it's like the obvious benefit of Medicare and Social Security that even the Republicans, nobody's, this is going to be interesting, this idea of cutting spending. Has it ever happened?
It didn't happen under Reagan. It almost never happens because once a law is in place And once the dependencies are
Well,
set
that's
up,
right.
it's very
That's
difficult
the
to dismantle.
trajectory of things.
Okay, and
That's the growth of the public sector.
Historically, when we look at nations, the rise and fall of nations, going back 3,000 years, governments grow.
And so has the standard of living.
They end up consuming the society's resources.
Well,
They get weak.
we
They
consume
fall.
society's resources.
But,
and
but,
we grow.
but it matters that the Roman Empire fell. It matters that the Greek Empire fell. It matters that the Italian Renaissance fell. Those things matter because it affects our lives. And so I'm not comfortable just saying, well, that's what happened. I want to say, is it good? And is it good? Does it actually lead to greater depth for greater span?
Yes, absolutely yes.
Okay.
Unequivocally.
I'm saying that when the Roman Empire fell.
Well, that was a setback, I will grant you.
Okay.
In certain ways.
So there are setbacks.
No, there are setbacks, absolutely.
Okay. And setbacks are consequences of our choices.
Yes.
And so
yes.
the question is, what are the choices we're going to make?
I mean, we're
In
going to
the
make
short term-
ethnocentric choices when we're ethnocentric, but the thing is, we now have a consensus, a global consensus around modernity that is stunning and new and emergent, and we ought to appreciate it. Thanks, man. We have a couple questions, so let's go for it, man. With the white shirt and also the blue shirt next door.
There seems to be at least an agreement that the bottom is rising, at least within the United States. I mean, between the two of your arguments.
Is there? I would say so, and also
absolutely.
worldwide. I mean, in
Okay.
stunning ways.
And I
Absolutely.
think that's also with respect to the altitudes of development up this chart. But there's an incongruency here that I can't quite get my head around, and that's from the attitude of wealth redistribution and of government control. If everybody, and I got to go theoretical here again, but if everybody was up into the second or third tier, would there be a need for laws other than those which prevent chaos, like traffic laws?
Probably not.
And if there's not, then
Why don't we do it?
what does that transition look like if we don't start progressing in that direction now? To Mark's point, is there some change, some radical shift that changes
I think
where we
we are
start
progressing
relaxing
there.
away from force and start going towards persuasion, or is it something that we need to evolve towards?
I think we are evolving towards it. I don't know where, aside from taxation, where's the force? There's regulation, and yes, regulation has a downside. We could talk for days about the downside of regulation, and also recognize that when I was a kid, you couldn't breathe in the mornings in my town because they had let the coke ovens out, and we were consumed by sulfur and probably carbon monoxide, and God only knows. But that was, the good old EPA, good old Richard Nixon, man. He really carried the ball for the EPA. And that was great progress. And that was absolutely tax funded.
Yeah.
It's a public sector thing.
And it's an important thing, an absolutely critical thing to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what should the tax rate be? Should it be, what do you say, 20%? I don't know. 50.
How about a different question?
Yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah, there we go.
Wait,
Sorry.
so
about that.
I just want to say one thing on that. We do a regulation, and it has costs and it has benefits. If we just look at the costs, like you say, if you just look at the costs, well, then obviously we don't want any regulations. If we just look at the benefits, then we say, well, gosh, all we want is regulations.
All I'm saying is that the benefits outweigh the costs.
Okay, and what I'm saying is how you measure that, how you answer that
decency of
question.
human life.
By what measurement? Right? How you measure that is a choice. How you choose to measure whether it's good or bad is a choice, and the structure
Well,
you
there's
use.
a moral intuition. Come on, there's a moral intuition that
I think that there are disagreements about our moral intuitions.
Oh, come on, no. There's no. We just continue to see more. We continue to see that child is mine. That's just an ever-increasing circle. I would move heaven and earth to save a starving child in Denver. There probably is one. I probably shouldn't say that so glibly. but you know what I'm saying, is that that is just continues to be an ever-widening circle of, care. And I'm not sure you're arguing with that.
I'm not arguing with that.
No.
What I'm arguing is
the
when
coercive
you
nature
care,
of the enforcement of it.
if you care about something, how do you go about demonstrating your care? Do you go do something about it? Do you find people and say, look at this problem, let's get together and solve this problem?
Yes.
Or do you say, and since I'm putting it in either or, you can certainly say both and,
Yes.
right? Which is a fair answer, but I'm looking for better, not just, okay, we'll do them both, or we won't do either. Which one is better?
Well,
and I'll go back to the point.
That's, I think, the crux of it is that it's
Yes.
absolutely both. There's no option where it's not both. And it is a matter of, better as a sort of a contention. It's sort of a natural contention between agency and communion, which is just part of the buzz of the original evolutionary impulse.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And some choices lead to more thriving than others.
Absolutely.
Some lead to suffering.
Yes.
So it's not only the buzz.
If you thought it was going to move to suffering, you wouldn't make that choice. You have to sometimes make the choice and do something in order to see what the results are.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So you have to make a choice and discover the results.
Yeah, we
The
did a
question
lot of years of human
The question
sacrifice
is,
trying to solve our problems.
do we measure the results
Did it work?
and question our
Felt good.
methods? Or do we just say, for example, we want everyone to have health insurance. Therefore, we're going to give everyone health insurance. Did it work? No. We need to give more programs. Right? We could say, recognize this trend. Society is going along, and it's got a particular equilibrium. It is the way that it is. And then someone says, hey, let's create this program to solve this problem. And they create the program. But the problem isn't solved. In fact, the problem gets worse. How do you understand that? I'm saying that there is a tendency, once you get government bureaucracy in place, once you start using force, that you say, I know the reason why it didn't work. We aren't doing enough of it. We need to do it more, and if we only do it more, then it will work. Right? And then it still doesn't work. Right? How long have we had our war on poverty? How long have we had our war on drugs? How long have we been trying to take care of the sick and the elderly? We keep saying we're going to put this program into place and it's going to solve the problem.
Well, there's
But
a
it
difference
doesn't,
between
and when it doesn't, our
war on-
tendency is to say we need more of whatever solution we have.
Well, there's a difference between
but
the
there's
war
a-
on drugs and taking care of the elderly, which are two of the examples you just used.
Mm-hmm.
The war on drugs has, by all accounts, been a very expensive failure.
Some people think that.
Well, in terms of addiction, yeah, you're right. There's all kinds of measures, I suppose. But
And that's what matters. What matters is that what I think we need to deal with in terms of the integral model is that different people look at the data differently.
yes,
What are the criteria they're using? And how do we help get better criteria in place? How do we help people choose and say, obviously in the short term, it is better for everyone to have health care. Everyone agrees on that. In the short term, it's better if we just give everybody health care. The question is, what are the impacts on the system 5 and 10 and 20 and 40 years out? And that's where we have disagreement. Some people...
Black and white, do this, do that, do this, do that, but I think you have to take a step, take a look at what works, what doesn't, and tweak it. Not just, yes, do it, or, oh, it's not working, stop it totally, and obviously not, if it's not working, let's do more of it. But you do have measurement, and you do check and balance along the way.
I like that you do this and you do conversations that go on in our culture. We don't measure. We don't say, oh, our healthcare system sucks. It really sucks. Why?
Well, there are
Why does it suck?
thousands of
Is
extremely
it-
smart people
is it-
working on that
Right.
every day.
And some people say the reason it sucks is because the government has created these laws. You can't buy insurance across state. They give a tax deduction to businesses for offering you health care,
No, it's
which offers a completely
it's
twisted
arising
set of
out of
incentives.
the sea of corruption. There's no doubt.
And so I think there's a legitimate case to be made that what we need to do is add more free market into healthcare, and that's how we will get a better system.
See, this is where
But to answer that question, you actually have to understand economics. Do
All
we
right.
understand economics
let's
as an
go to
electorate?
so you have the microphone. Let's go to yes, welcome.
So I have a sense that we're probably coming at the end of the conversation, and so I'm thinking about what I want to walk away with. So this has been awesome entertainment and education first, so thanks for that. So I'm wondering two things. The first is, if I had 2 hours to invest once a week for the next 4 years, and I was using the model of force and persuasion, what things could I look for that might help me feel more solid in the way that I vote? And I'm hoping that, Mark, when you started the conversation tonight, what I think I heard you say is that you figured out a model, or you have a model in your mind's eye of how force and persuasion apply to each of the areas in the model. And I'm hoping maybe you could blend those two questions together, and maybe I could walk away with some nuggets in how I could actually take action in my own life.
Wow, what a great question. So I think if you want to be persuasive in a way that you actually feel good about it, like you actually feel like you know what you're talking about, rather than I won the partisan point, right? So that you could say you actually know what you're talking about when you're doing the persuasion. I think there are two realms that you need to have a basic understanding of the fundamental issues. One of them is economics. You need to understand supply and demand, marginal utility, incentives, and how prices are actually formed. What happens when you allow a free market to happen? What happens when you stop a free market? What are the impacts of that? And I'll offer a book, Economics in One Lesson, by Henry Hazlitt. It's a small book. It's written for a popular audience. Hazlitt, Hazlitt.
Economics and what?
Economics in One Lesson. I consider that to be a must read for anyone who wants to enter into the political dialogue around economics and kind of know what they're talking about. Because it brings in the trade-off factor of economics. We could say that economics has one major point, is that everything valuable is scarce. It's valuable because it's scarce. If it weren't scarce, it wouldn't be valuable. If we don't value the air because it's abundant, we value things which are scarce. And so economics is about how do you deal with scarce resources. Not how should you deal with it. That would be, you could say, a political position. But economics is how do we as human beings deal with scarce resources? How does the pricing mechanism work? If I value something more than you, how do we deal with that? And so understanding basic economics, and Economics in One Lesson is an excellent introduction to that. The second major piece is that you need to understand political incentives. You need to understand the incentives that happen when you have bureaucracy. Because the real decisions that are made in terms of where force is going to be used in our lives, what happens with our programs, are all made in political contexts where there is a rhetoric of what I'm saying. Vote for me, I'll do this. Vote for me, I'll do this. Vote for me, I'll do this. But Every single position is held by an individual who has their own incentives. And when you have the responsibility of making choices, right? Let's say I'm let's say I'm the car czar. And I'm going to make a choice that when I make that choice, it's going to impact all of the companies in the industry and all of their employees. And it's going to impact all the people who buy cars. And the effect of that policy 5 years out and 10 years out and 20 years out are uncertain. But I have to make the choice because I'm the car czar. How do I make that choice? There's a set of political incentives that work, that guide our politicians, that guide our lobbyists. And the book I would suggest for that is called The Road to Serfdom by Hayek, Friedrich Hayek, Hayek. And it was written by someone who was a former socialist who, as an economist, looked at the socialist system and said, "Hello, fellow socialists. Here's what I've discovered. I want you to think these thoughts and see what you think." And he offered a series of principles and followed out their logical. And as you go through that, it gives you a sense for the political incentives and what happens to bureaucracies. Why are bureaucracies so hard to change? Why do they tend to grow? There's an ecology to political power, and it operates on a certain set of rules. And if you don't understand those rules, if you just go by what people say versus the backdoor political mechanisms that really make things happen, and the tremendous challenge that our politicians face when they have to make a choice, right? We're going to reform the healthcare system. Well, the healthcare system means we're going to change the way that doctors work with patients. We're going to change what they charge. We're going to change the way the insurance companies work. There are hundreds of insurance companies. There are hundreds of thousands of doctors. There are probably 1 million people, nurse practitioners. And I'm going to make a choice that's going to impact all of them. How do I make that choice? Based on what principles? Based on what incentives? And if you understand economics and you understand the political world, the world of political incentives, and then you listen to politicians, you recognize that they are simplifying issues down into sound bites to try to leverage the emotional worlds of the people in the electorate. That they're not dealing with the real issues. And if you understand basic economics, and if you understand basic political ecology, then when the politicians speak, you question them. Again, it gets beyond, do I want a Republican, do I want a Democrat? And then you can start to influence the conversations of people and say, hey, well, have you thought about this? I understand you really think we should do this. Why? What is that based on? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? You know, it's not do this and not that. It's let's build mutual understanding. And economics and political ecology or political incentives are the two things that I would say. And to put it quickly into the model. If we say that red is about status and power, all politicians have red drives, right? They want to be in the Senate because being in the Senate is a place of such prestige where so many people lick your boots, and you have lobbyists just trying to do anything they can to offer you things so that they can influence your vote. And so in that, for your red power drives as a politician, power and status are going to be driving your decisions. And I believe as an electorate, we need to think about that. So when we give people power and we give them status, we have to recognize that they're not just doing it for the public good, they're doing it for their own good. Right? And then you move into blue, where you've got belief systems. I have a myth, I have a belief system about how things should be, I have a moral view of the world. And I believe that my moral view is right and all of the other ones are wrong. And so when I'm in power, I'm going to be making decisions on legislation based on my worldview, but also on how I can manipulate the worldview of my electorate. Right? Oh, I have a religious electorate. I'm going to pound God because that's going to get me the votes to keep me in power so I can do something. And so understanding that the politician has these levels and the electorate has these levels, and the politician is going to speak to their electorate. Right? The classic analysis of Wilbur and Integral is that the Republican Party has blue religion and orange free market individualism. And in the party, the Republican Party is tearing apart because there's small government conservatives who want fiscal conservatism, and then there's social conservatives who want government control of our morality, who we marry, whether or not abortion is paid for by the government. Right? There are value systems that get leveraged by this political economy. When you get into orange and you get into green, which you could say that the Democrat Party is largely orange and green, and they're also at loggerheads. Right? Obama is a great example of someone who's got some pretty good orange ideas. He understands a lot about the market. And he's got green ideas about, very similar to Jeff. Well, what we need to do is have the government come in and step in and fix the places where the market isn't working. When you're at this level, you can say orange, bad. Free market, bad. Capitalist, bad. Right? Religion, bad. Religion is bad. Power, wanting power and status, that's bad. What we need is politicians who are above all of that, who just look at what needs to be done, and they just work to fix the system. They're not ideological. They just work to fix the system. Right? And that's the kind of speak that Green likes. Do they really not have power drives? Are they really not ideologically motivated? Are they really not beholden to their corporate interests or their union?
Oh, no.
Are they really disinterested? No, they're not. They're human beings. We as human beings are all of these things. But when you look at these levels, I believe an integral perspective is when you look at the level, you recognize its healthy value as well as its detriment. So you recognize that red and power and status, all human beings will always want power and status. Right? How many gurus fall because of power and status? It's built into our nature. Right? We all want power and status. We all want a sense of the world where we say, this is good. This is fundamentally what's right. And that's what we want more of. Right? We all have our own personal values, our sense of what's beautiful, our sense of what's important. And we want to be able to create that. And we all have the capacity to take other people's perspectives and recognize that we're not the only right way. And when you look at each of these and you look out in the electorate and you find out what's right as well as what's wrong, that's, I think, why this model is useful. So that instead of just saying, oh, you're being orange, oh, that's a blue value, oh, that's a red value, it's to say, there are red values out there. How do we speak to them? How do we offer healthy red power and status to our electorate? And how do we deal with that in our politicians? I'm not sure if that answered your question. But
That was awesome. Thank you very much.
Cool, man. I always respect a man who can stand in front of the altitudes of development. It makes sense. So I appreciate that.
Give that name and author. Sorry. Can Can you just give the name and the author of the political incentives book again?
Yes, it's The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich A. Hayek, Hayek. And both of those books, I encourage you to read them, not to agree with them, but because they ask really, really good questions. And in the process of dealing with the questions, it gets you to think new thoughts. Right? Again, I'm not pro-Republican, I'm not pro-Democrat, I'm not even pro-libertarian. I'm just really interested in asking fundamental questions about how we want to relate to each other. And I think that there are questions that if you don't ask them, create tremendous problems. An example I'll sometimes use is if I say, okay, I'm going to describe a food, and it tastes delicious, and it's nutritious, and it's inexpensive, and it's convenient, right? But it turns out that it's kind of poisonous. Would you eat the food? Right? No, I mean, to the degree that it's poisonous, you're not going to eat it. But if you don't ask the question, is it poisonous? Right? If you just neglect that question, you can ask, well, does it taste good? Yes, okay, excellent. Does it have nutrients in it? Oh, yes, lots of nutrients. Right? Is it inexpensive? Oh, yeah. It's $1 you could eat for a day. Right? If you don't ask the question, is it poisonous? You can end up making some really bad choices. And I think understanding economics and understanding political ecology through those two books, he asks questions that have you say, well, have you asked whether or not it's poisonous or not? Have you thought through the predictable consequences that will happen? We've got lots of history with government. What happens when you put these things in place? And not just government. What happens in relationships? You know, with Casey, I'm doing the Thriving Partnerships course, which is a course on relationships. And it's really designed for one-on-one relationships. It works for communities and businesses and stuff, but it's really designed for one-on-one relationships. The exact same principles hold. Right? There are certain ways to relate that if you just remember them, if you just remember to ask the question, it leads you to make better choices and build a better relationship. And it's not having the answer, it's having the question. And that's what those books are really designed to have you ask the question. So thanks for asking, because those books have, both of them are over 50 years old, and they're still completely relevant today. In fact, I just don't know better books. If they were more recent books I could suggest, I would offer them. But those are just classic asking the really hard questions.
Cool, man. Well, we've been going at it for 2.5 hours.
Yeehaw!
Isn't that something? Yeah, that was fun. And, you know, I really admire and, you know, respect what you're bringing online here, man. And it's, you know.
I always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, totally. I learned a lot. And, you know, I'm kind of all for you. So, yeah, carry on.
Thanks.
And everyone, you know, all good. I think that's it for now. 2.5 hours, and thanks for coming, and see you next time. All right. Thanks, Mark Michael Lewis. And how might we get in touch with you, or do you have a website or something?
Thrivingpartnerships.com gets you into my relationship work, and from there you can go to my work on values or my coaching work, my business work. Oh, I'll be back Thursday on live stream.
Oh, cool.
Doing a course on thriving partnerships.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's you could get that on the Integral Center site.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. All right. I think that's good. As always, I'm at thedailyevolver.com. Yeah, cool. You.